Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the 7 pitfalls of technology asset management. My name is Mike Schmidt, and I will be your host for today. Mark Gatos, Enlight's Chief Marketing Officer, will explain how you can reduce costs and improve asset security with Enlight's Asset Explorer. He will also share some interesting facts from your peers based on a recent asset management survey. We want to respect your time, so we'll keep this webinar under 30 minutes. We encourage you to ask your questions, type them into the chat box, and we'll answer them at the end. If we don't get to it, we promise that we'll follow up with any unanswered questions personally. On to you, Mark.
Hello, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Mark Gatos. I want to thank you for the time you're going to be spending with us today. Today's webinar is titled, as mentioned, The 7 Pitfalls of Technology Asset Management. And it's actually based on an ebook we put out. So if you're interested in reading as well as hearing about it, you can go to enlight.com, go to resources, and you can download that ebook. So we tend to have a pretty fast webinar. We tend to keep them pretty quick. So we'll be moving through the content very rapidly, especially since we'll be sending the recording. You can always go over re-listen to any section that perhaps we went too fast. So without any further ado, I'll just sort of jump into it. So first off, who is Enlight Software? We're a dedicated software company. We're on the 10th generation of our technology, and we basically help organizations manage their computing infrastructure. So whether it's in data centers, co-location facilities, in their own facilities, we help organizations manage that infrastructure. And we have from small to hyperscale organizations. We'll show you a few of them on the next slide. And we really pride ourselves on being easy to do business with. And as a result of having great technology, of being easy to work with, we have a sort of an unprecedented 98% customer retention rate, which, as I said, we're very proud of and we focus on and attend to constantly. And if you have any questions for us, please submit them into chat and we will try to get to all the questions at the end of the webinar. So as I mentioned, we have a very strong focus on customer retention and the success of our customers. We have a little over 350 global customers worldwide. They come from a wide variety of industries, from financial services, healthcare, high tech, federal government. So they come from a wide variety of industries. And as I mentioned before, we have smaller organizations to absolute hyperscale companies using Enlight solutions. But what they all have in common is all these organizations use some or all of Enlight's technology to manage some or all of their computing infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, that can be in their own data centers and co-location facilities, managed services, on the edge, in retail locations. So these organizations really are managing their computing infrastructure wherever it happens to be. You can break Enlight's solutions into two main areas, two main solution suites. First is our traditional data center infrastructure management, which is often referred to as DSIM, and the other is our technology asset management suite. And really these two suites, again, are designed to help companies really increase the agility and achieve more efficiency and cost effectiveness by managing their infrastructure using the Enlight solutions. But ultimately, organizations are trying to solve problems when they buy the Enlight solution. So we get used in a variety of different scenarios. Sometimes we get used for DSIM, Data Center Infrastructure Management. We're also used in the United States federal organizations for what is referred to as DCOI, the Data Center Optimization Initiative. Some organizations have TAM initiatives. Some organizations have workload service management or co-location service initiatives. Some organizations use us for compliance. Some use us for asset integrity. Really, it really varies depending on the type of organization and the specific needs, how those two suites, DSIM and TAM, get used by those organizations, use those Enlight solutions. If you drill down into the Enlight solution suites, you'll find that each solution suite is made up of specific applications. Data Center Infrastructure Management has the Enlight Asset Optimizer, Enlight Energy Optimizer, Enlight system utilization monitoring, as well as Asset Explorer for data center infrastructure management. On the TAM side, on the technology asset management side, we've got Asset Explorer, we've got Application Tracker, and our Software Asset Manager. Today, we're going to be focusing on the 7 pitfalls of technology asset management, and they're very focused on the application Asset Explorer, and we'll be talking a little bit about how Enlight's Asset Explorer is different than other solutions out there. So before we drill into the 7 pitfalls of technology asset management, let's talk about what do we mean by technology asset management. You hear about IT asset management. Technology asset management is a bigger, broader category. It's not only those IT assets you want to maintain, manage, understand how they're configured, what software is running on them, but it's additional assets that don't typically fall under IT, like medical devices and a myriad of devices on the edge and so forth. So it's a broader category of the assets that really are getting on your network. And ultimately, you want to have one source of truth, and you want to understand the asset dependencies, the hardware, software, and network attributes. You want to understand what assets are out there and the changes being made to those assets. You want to be alert appropriate individuals if changes are made to those assets or new assets appear that you weren't aware. And ultimately, you want to tie the information of technology asset management into your business systems, into your security systems, and ultimately you want to be able to do robust reporting and analytics and generating audit trails of what's happening to all of your technology assets. How do you get your arms around all of these PCs, servers, switches, devices that are coming onto your network, and maybe you see some of them all the time and maybe some of them are on sporadically. So it's, again, understanding all of that and understanding all the dependencies that exist with all of these different devices and technology assets. So the first pitfall we find organizations sometimes fall into is sort of the pitfall of obscurity. They're thinking that their organization or their group within the organization is not going to be noticed either by cyber criminals, by software vendors who are looking to see if folks are using more licenses than they should be, by auditors who are looking to find reporting issues of folks that are not properly maintaining their technology assets. Very common to think, no one's going to really notice what we're doing. But ultimately, there's risk here. You find out that devices you weren't aware are being hacked. You might end up paying fines and unexpected license fees on software when a vendor shows up and just says, you owe us more money. And then ultimately you can have issues with internal or external auditors assessing fines or penalties to you or your organization because you don't have good control of your technology assets. And somewhat related to the first pitfall of obscurity, the second one is the pitfall of indolence, right? Of organizations just not caring about the issues of really tightly managing their assets and thinking, we've got a lot of other priorities. Let's not really care about that. I mean, some organizations just do this. And so the risk here is by not addressing the issues of the hardware and software on your network, it's not an excuse. You can't just fall back and say, well, it wasn't a priority, because you're really running a risk of having issues with auditors, issues with software companies, or that you buy software from. And you're just, the excuse that we weren't focused on it's just not going to work. And in the end, someone is going to be held accountable if issues arise, especially if there was actually no attempt made to get your arms around the problem. If you were actually trying, that's one thing. If there was no process in place, this actually can be very problematic, either with external parties or internal auditors. So again, just sort of not saying it's a priority can be a major pitfall for organizations and the risks that are posed by not tightly managing their technology assets. The third pitfall is the pitfall of blendness, or being blind to some of the assets that are on your network. And you might have the greatest intentions and want to track your technology assets, but sometimes you just lack insight into all the assets that are on your network, either frequently or infrequently, and the configuration of those assets. And again, whether you care or you don't, sometimes you just don't have insight and you can't manage what you don't see. So the risk is what you can't see, what you can't see ultimately can hurt your organization. And unmanaged assets are a risk waiting to negatively affect you and your organization. Of course, if things are out there you're not aware is running on them, folks could be installing software that you don't have licenses for, or they could be on old versions of software that introduce risk to your system. So ultimately, if you don't have an idea of what is out there, it's impossible to manage it. And if you don't manage it, it could be introducing risk to your organization in a variety of different ways. The fourth pitfall is the pitfall of squander. And not all organizations fall into this, but a lot don't care if they spend too much money. They're buying more software licenses than they need. They're paying maintenance on decommissioned equipment. They just don't care about spending excess money than they need to. And this actually does occur quite often. Folks are like, well, let's just have more licenses than we need. Oh, let's just not focus on this because the problem's too hard. So there is a risk here that someone in your organization is finally going to care and is going to be concerned with spending more money than you need to. And if management finds out, they're going to be distressed and potentially angry if they find out that money is being wasted for assets that don't need maintenance agreements, or on software that isn't being used, or too much software that's putting the organization at risk. So, and eventually, the money does run out. You do run out of budget. So it's best to have a good grasp of what's actually running on your network, what software is running, what hardware, so you're not overspending and wasting money that you didn't need to, that you could use somewhere else within your organization in a more effective fashion. The fifth pitfall is the pitfall of being loud, and we don't mean it as an individual. It's using technology that is so loud on the network and so noisy that it causes technical issues and people begin to complain. And this can also be not using your technology asset management solution because it has detrimental impact on the network, where it's so loud, either people tell you to shut it off and there are complaints, or you end up not using it because you're concerned about the impact it has on the network. The risk of this is you don't keep track of the technology assets you have on the network because the tool is too loud. The second is sometimes you're actually prevented from using the solution for managing your assets because the network team demands it and says that tool is not being used, or it's only going to be used once a month. They put a limitation on it so you can't keep constant track. And so asset information falls out of date. The information you know about your devices, about the hardware, about the firmware, about the software goes out of date, and you start running into all the risks and issues we talked about previously. This is the pitfall of being too loud, of using a solution that's way too loud on the network and is really clogging up the network with too much use and too much overhead. So the next pitfall, pitfall 6, is a pitfall of avariciousness, which is the opposite of squander. It's your organization's unwilling to spend any money to keep track of assets on any ongoing basis. And this is where typically organizations consider the accounting system to be the final system of record for assets and their configurations. The risk of taking this approach is your financial systems quickly get out of date with real-world representations of your assets, of devices, of the hardware, software, and firmware. It quickly starts changing and in a short amount of time becomes radically different than what's actually occurring out on the network. And so rogue hardware and software is introduced to your network, and the accounting system or financial systems don't have a good view of it. Even your ITSM systems could not maybe falling out of date and not having that information, or your CMDB is just getting out of date because you don't want to spend money to keep track of this information. So your organization spends significantly more in the long run in time and money making updates and managing devices when operational personnel are constantly having to find where is this device or this server or this switch actually located, or what systems are dependent on it. So you end up spending more in the long run in time and in money because this information gets out of sync. And this is pitfall number 6. And the last pitfall is pitfall 7, which is procrastination. And I think we've all suffered from this at one time or another in our lives. And if you've worked in IT, I've certainly had in the past, and it is very easy to procrastinate on issues. And so the symptom here is thinking you can get to the task of managing your technology asset management at some point. Eventually I'll get to this. And you just procrastinate and kick the can down the road. And it's allowing other priorities to prevent you from having that tight technology asset management. Oh, I've got these other things to take care of. Oh, I'm going to get to that later. Oh, it's kind of a hard problem and it's constantly changing. I'll just deal with it later. So procrastination can actually be a result of some of the other pitfalls, but in itself is probably one of the biggest risks. And the risk here is the day never arises where you actually take care of this until something critical happens. All of a sudden there's an explosion, there's a fire, a critical issue in the organization, and all of a sudden everybody's hair is on fire and you're running to solve the problem. Then everything gets rushed because of an audit or a vendor is sending an invoice to you. Things are exploding and you're having to react rather than proactively take care of it. And this really puts an organization at risk, and sometimes heads roll. Sometimes people, organization make changes to organizations because the issues that occur are so bad. It's an outage, or it's a software vendor saying you're using too many licenses, and they end up charging penalties and fees. So again, procrastination can lead to an explosion that causes issues within the organization. So best to stay ahead of it and not allow procrastination to be one of the pitfalls to proper technology asset management. So this is where Inlight's next generation technology asset management solution comes in. We have an application within our technology asset management suite called Asset Explorer, and it basically sees wider. It's vendor agnostic, it's protocol agnostic, and so it can go out and find more assets on the network. It's a single tool to find hardware, software, Internet of Things devices, firmware, provides discovery, inventory, software asset management, and utilization. And it can go out and find a wider set of assets. When we run it with organizations that have one or two discovery solutions already, they're amazed at what we find additionally on the network, in the data center, in remote locations. So by seeing things wider, it provides a much more robust view and a better solution to avoid those 7 pitfalls we talked about earlier. The next thing about Inlight's Asset Explorer is it can drill deeper into those specific devices and assets. It provides flexible interrogation to get a comprehensive set of literally hundreds of assets, if you like, and data points out of different devices. And it can take that information and integrate it into IT or business intelligence systems, and it becomes a single source of knowledge that you define what you want to find, what you want to report against what are potentially hundreds of data points. And it's all done in a quiet fashion. Once you've done the initial exploration and interrogation of your devices, you can decide what information you want back, and you will only receive the changes. You don't have to bring back a great deal of information, and you only take the change information to minimize the impact on your network. And lastly, one of the great things about Inlight Asset Explorer is it has the lowest total cost of ownership of any other solution like it on the market. Lower acquisition costs than any enterprise solution out there. It's easily implemented, managed, rapid deployment that basically is self-installable, no training, network compliance or programming skills required, no custom code that you have to maintain, with an open architecture that, as I mentioned before, supports the major protocols that are out there to find assets. Again, creating the lowest total cost of ownership, not only to acquire, but to maintain the solution over time. So that wraps it up for the specific slides we were going to cover today. I would strongly urge you to go to nlight.com, and we actually have a report which was commissioned by Sapio Research on the challenges around technology asset management and the device proliferation that's occurring in many organizations. I'd urge you to go to nlight.com, go under resources, and you can find this report, as well as the 7 Pitfalls of Technology Asset Management ebook that we've been covering today. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to our moderator and see what sort of questions we received.
Thanks, Mark, for the facts and the interesting take on asset management challenges. Remember to ask questions. Please use the chat box on the side. We have several queuing up already. Those questions that we don't get to, we'll personally follow up with you shortly. Jameson asks, we currently use ServiceNow for change management and Nlight to manage our data center. Is Asset Explorer part of your data center product, and how is it different from ServiceNow?
Well, Jameson, thanks for the question, and thanks for being a customer. So first off, I don't know which ServiceNow products you have, but Nlight's Asset Explorer interfaces with, first off, Nlight's DSIM products. So we actually provide what we call the continuously aware data center. So we can help automate as assets come into your data center. We can seamlessly integrate them into Nlight. Additionally, we tie into ServiceNow and can populate the ServiceNow CMDB. So and as I mentioned before, our discovery solution is more robust than the ServiceNow solution. It's, again, we'll talk about it, going wider, getting more assets, deeper exploration with a lower total cost of ownership. So it's a pretty unique solution and really is the next generation of technology, but it certainly doesn't replace everything ServiceNow does. But we can feed information into ServiceNow as well as into, as you would expect, into the Nlight solution to provide what we refer to as the continuously aware data center. So I hope that answered your question, and thanks for the question.
Vu's asking, you talked about software vendor audits. Are they for real, or are they just a scare tactic by the vendors and companies like yours?
That's a great question, Vu. I've asked myself the same question before. And actually, yes, audits are real. Obviously, they don't happen all the time to everyone, but you can go look, just do a search on software audit and put in whatever particular large software vendor you want, and you can find folks like the City of Denver, the U.S. Air Force and Army, a variety of landmark cases out there where folks get into the news and they don't want to. So although the number of cases has declined, the number of audits is actually up. It's a great way for these organizations to make money, is to go to an existing customer and say, hey, you're using more licenses than you've actually purchased from us. And so it becomes low-hanging fruit for these organizations to make more money. And so it does actually happen. The easiest way to see the folks it's happening to is to do a search in Google and realize a majority of audits don't show up in the news. They don't show up on a website. They're just handled offline with the software vendor, and you never hear about it. So remember, whatever you see is just the tip of the iceberg to what's actually happening. But a great question, Vu. I've asked myself the same thing.
This question's from Rachel. I had the opportunity to read the white paper associated with the survey you referenced. It implies that in some companies, over 20% of assets are undiscovered. How is that possible, and how do you explain that?
Thanks for the question, Raquel. Really, industry experts have been saying this for a very long time, and really the survey just confirms what we've heard for many, many years. There are multiple reasons why this is happening. There's bad network mapping, agents not installed or not operating properly, inability to detect certain hardware and software that's been added or removed. The list goes on. There's a myriad of different reasons why information isn't accurate, or you're not seeing particular assets that are out there. Either they're on networks that haven't been discovered, or you're not using particular protocols to see those particular networks across varying across different subnets. So again, there are a myriad of reasons, but it's not that uncommon. Sounds horrific, but it actually is very common. So thanks for the question. I hope that gives you the answer you're looking for.
Thank you, Mark, and thank all of you for your time. We will follow up with all of the unanswered questions shortly. In the meantime, please feel free to contact us at info@nlight.com for more information or to get a demo. We have several useful articles, white papers, and ebooks to help you and your management get your arms around the many facets of asset management. Please check them out on nlight.com, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.